Venetia, I was just saying to Malisha, I think at 11 o'clock, let's start. People will carry on coming in, but I think let's get going, because if they're Q&A, we're going to, and I see a lot of people are starting to join. So at 11 o'clock, let's kickstart, introduce Malisha, let's do it, and people will just join as we go.
Now it's Colleen.
Okay.
All right. Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone on our coffee session, our EOH coffee session. My name is Venetia van Wyk, and I am so excited to introduce our speaker, Malisha Awunor. Malisha is a seasoned professional with over 25 years of invaluable experience in the dynamic realm of people and culture. Malisha's journey is marked by a rich tapestry of experience, boasting a business master's in change management and transformation. Over 16 years of a career were dedicated to mining operations across Africa and South America, showcasing her versatility and adaptability in challenging environments. What sets Malisha apart is not just her impressive professional, but her passion for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Her dedication to fostering equitable, performance-driven work cultures speaks volumes about her commitment to driving positive change within organizations. Her commitment extends beyond the boardroom, as she actively invests in mentoring young minds driven by a genuine desire to make a difference in all aspects of life. Her commitment, sorry about that. So as a testament to our outstanding contributions, we are so proud to announce that Malisha is the overall winner of the Strategy and Leadership Award in the CHRO Awards 2023, a recognition that further underscores her impact and leadership in this field. Her vision is a fusion of a heart for people meeting the power of technology, where exponential and impactful change becomes just one and make that a possibility, but turn that into a reality. So everyone, please join me in extending a warm welcome to Malisha. Malisha is a driving force for positive transformation and advocate for the belief that every individual has the power to be anything they choose to be. Welcome, Malisha, and over to you.
Thanks, Venetia. I think you missed two important things. One, I'm a proud mum of two, which is the single most hardest job that I have. And the second part is that I'm just a young girl from Actonville, right, with parents only at primary school education. And the reason I think that it's important to share that with everybody is in today's discussion, we often talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. We talk about things like psychological safety without having a true appreciation of the fact that we have a responsibility to fundamentally shift the narratives around what good looks like, around what success looks like, And I think in today's session, I'd like for us to, one, put aside the shame that's often attached to diversity discussions, for us to put aside moving beyond theory, moving beyond our history, not disrespecting it, but moving beyond what we were taught around diversity being a liability to it actually being an asset. And most importantly for me, for us to understand that we each on our own journey in relation to DEI and B. And I think in relation to those biases, it's certainly not easy. So as I stand here in front of you, I have to declare a disclaimer beforehand. I'm not standing here saying that I have all the answers. Neither am I standing here saying we need to be politically correct. I think if we want to leave behind something better for our children than what we've inherited, it requires of each and every one of us to do some deep soul searching work in relation to how we fundamentally shift the narratives and address social and structural exclusion, both within the workplace and in the communities that we're from. So with your indulgence, I would love to actually start with a little social experiment. I'm going to briefly play a video. And as the questions come up in the video, I'd like you to just consider for a second, have you ever been on the giving end of the question or on the receiving end of the question? And please trust that this is a safe enough space so you can go through the emotions as required. So I'm going to just open up my video quickly. Venetia, will you let me know when you can see it?
Yes, we can see it, Malisha.
Out of the shade, out of the shadows, out of the haze, I'm coming out of the ashes, alright. You can run, but you can't hide. Breath on your skin, never right. Here I am. Here I am. I am afraid. You cannot fathom. Get in my way. Lethal assassin. I bring the pain. You can imagine. Nothing but flames. This is what happens. All of the ashes are rise. You can run, but you can't hide. Breath on your skin, never right. Here I am. Here I am. A force to be reckoned with. A blade you've been messing with. Here I am. A game you won't ever win. It's your bravery beckoning. Oh, here I
So I'm sure that at least 90% of the people on the call can give testimony to being asked those questions. And while they may seem rather nebulous or vanilla, they actually are deeply rooted in biases that we are raised with. So as I stand in front of you today, having this conversation in a very privileged position, I am very aware that I am 48 years of cultural experiences, of religious experiences, of social, political, and economic exposure. And what we need to try to do is understand how there's certain deeply ingrained practices in our organizations, in our communities that fundamentally exclude people. So I've had a personal pursuit over the past 25 years to be able to challenge the status quo around you need to be from a particular school to be successful, that your accent is actually not an indication of your intelligence, that you don't have to come from a particular family in order to be successful, because those are the things that fundamentally exclude people, that even in starting the race, you haven't really reached the starting point. And I think when we talk social and structural exclusion, people often think, yeah, but it's history and it's in the past, we need to leave it behind. The reality is it's still fundamentally part of the way in which our businesses operate. And I think for those of you on the call who are people and culture professionals, we have a responsibility beyond drafting policies to actually challenge those practices. Examples that I can share with you are things like having drinks at 5. Not everybody may have the luxury to do that, whether it be because of restrictions around transport or family responsibility. If we take it a step further in relation to our promotions and socials that we have, when we have golf days, right? And I think for those on the call, it's important to understand that you can still be successful in environments that have those forms of often not conscious biases around how do we bring people around the table. And there's a few things for me along the way that has actually set in good stead around one. When you're in an environment, have a look around and understand who is not represented and why they're not represented. 2, the importance of actually meeting people where they are versus where we are. Because often in environments, we think everything has to be conflict-based. I have to have all the answers. I need to be able to deliver. Just sometimes take that step back and understand in terms of my team dynamics, in terms of decision-making, has my bias or is my biases actually coming through? So I'm just going to show some more slides, if I may. Venetia, can you guys still hear me?
We can, Malisha.
Thanks. So when we talk about biases, right? So what is an unconscious bias? An unconscious bias is actually your natural, instinctual response to people and things. So my team often laugh at me when I share this with them. But if I'm interviewing you for a job, and I say this not with glee, I say it with shame because it's behavior I've had to change over the years. So if I walk with you from the reception area to the interview room, and if you don't walk at the same pace as me, like my chances of shortlisting a person is hugely reduced, because in my frame of reference, from a success perspective, a successful person walks with purpose. A successful person walks fast enough. But can you see how fundamentally flawed that view of success actually is? Because it could be a person with a disability, it could be a person with really high heels, or it could be a really slippery floor. And the challenge that I have to each and every one of you on your journey on DE&I, on your journey of self-mastery, is to actually have a look at what those social constructs were that you were raised with in order to understand whether they're actually valid in this day and age. So unconscious bias is the fact that when we see something, we box it, we label it, because those are the things that give us a degree of comfort in how we deal with something. In taking that step back, one, it requires you to be vulnerable, which we were raised not to do. 2, it requires you to be able to admit you may not have all of the answers. And 3, it requires you to actually put yourself out there. My proposition going for everyone on the call is that embrace it, because the most beautiful relationships can start in environments where our meeting together is around what can we learn from one another and what can we teach one another, versus how do I outperform you? How do I compete against you? I think there's enough sun for all of us to shine. So from a bias and exclusion perspective, and I've tried to put some theory into today's talk, so it's not just seen as me talking about a life history, but understand those frameworks of bias, because there's over 150 types of them. They impact us in terms of our work, in terms of the types of decisions we make, in terms of the types of team dynamics that exist. And you have a responsibility. I often say to people, we expect this to be something someone else solves for us. We expect this to be something that can be dealt with policies. We expect this to be something, oh, the SDGs will sort it out for us. And I call BS on that because I think it's actually incumbent on each and every one of us to fundamentally create that change, because it is part of our DNA. And if we fundamentally can shift, that is how you create movements, and that is how you create revolutions. So educate yourself around what does this look like. I think critically, and I'm a firm believer in you are actually some of the books you read, the stuff that you're exposed to, and nothing upsets me more than people who hide behind formal structures, whether they be in the form of religion or policies, to justify prejudices or discrimination. And I think when you properly educate yourself, deal with things on a fact and science basis, it actually takes away the emotion of the aggression or prejudice that you may be faced with. So why do we talk about bias, and why am I taking your Friday morning to talk about unconscious bias? The slide in front of you is actually called the pyramid of prejudice. And at the basis and foundation of every form of prejudice, discrimination, is rooted in bias. It is in the jokes that we tell. It is in the rumors that we spread. It is in the stereotyping and language we use. Those people, they, them. It's in the insensitive remarks and in the non-inclusive language that we use. Now, I don't know if you're anything like me. I don't necessarily like conflict, right? So rather than challenge people, I would rather be quiet. But over the years, I've actually learned that silence is actually consent. And I would rather be part of the solution than part of the problem. And I think that nervousness and feeling you feel in the pit of your stomach when you know what something someone has said is deeply biased. You know what is the worst that's going to happen if you actually challenge it? What is the absolute worst that will happen if you put a halt to it and say, that comment actually made me feel uncomfortable? And I think if you start behaving in that way, and we often think that conflict has to be rude and aggressive. That's also not true, right? If it's done in a very respectful manner, if it's done in a manner that's around solving together, you'd be amazed at how fundamentally you can create shifts, not just in yourself, but in other people as well. And that whole thing of silence is consent is something that I feel incredibly strongly about. Does it mean it's easy for me? No, it isn't. But what it actually does in calling it out, in being that authentic, you also give people around you the permission to be able to have those difficult conversations. And the reason why I always put this up is to be able to understand that if we fundamentally at the core don't start addressing biases, they translate into acts of prejudice, into acts of discrimination. And you can see where the top of it is. I don't need to have to explain Rwanda or World War II to all of you. So what is it that I'd like to achieve? So the fundamental purpose that drives me is around how do we build social cohesion? Because driving social cohesion is not a construct just for political parties. Driving social cohesion is not just about, at the end of the day, what you look like or what you represent. Driving social cohesion is about fundamentally focusing on our humanity and building on it. We often talk about creating psychological safety, but do we actually do it where we allow people the permission to say, I am not comfortable right now, where we allow people the permission that says, at the end of the day, I work fundamentally different from the way you do. And everything that we do in our area, specifically in DE&I, is my focus around structural inclusion, psychological inclusion, behavioral inclusion, and social inclusion, right? And people say, but how does that fit into people and culture beyond the DE&I? For me, structural exclusion is pervasive, even in this day and age. And my humble apologies if there is anyone from a legal firm on this call, but I would like to share some thoughts. You know, the fact that as a candidate attorney, you need to have a driver's license and a vehicle. That's a form of structural exclusion, because just having that as an inherent requirement of a role fundamentally excludes a large degree of people. Now, I understand I'm married to an attorney, so I understand why a candidate attorney needs to be mobile. But what is there stopping us from actually saying we partner with a whole lot of driving schools to make sure that the youngsters do get their licenses, right? Partnering with enablers to make sure they have access to vehicles. We need to fundamentally start thinking out of the box. And that's why I say it's beyond the legislation, it's beyond the policies, because it's fundamentally leaving behind something better for our children than what we inherited. And I believe that if we can drive that change within ourselves, it translates into our teams, into our companies, and furthermore into the communities that we're from. So in order to give some gravitas to the presentation, I've got two interesting frameworks I'd like to share with you. We often talk about inclusion from a legislative perspective. And my challenge, as I've been sharing this morning, is that legislation is actually the floor. It's not the ceiling. And we need to interrogate as to whether we're doing things for the right reason, right? If we're not going to have the difficult conversations around addressing bias, whether they be conscious or unconscious, we're doing things to tick a box, which means fundamentally we're not shifting anything. So for anyone on the call who are in the finance area, I've got some numbers here that would talk to your heart in relation to inclusive organizations are much more innovative, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, 3 times more likely to be high performing, 2 times more likely to exceed financial targets. In fact, it is one of the big global firms that actually said just the inclusion of women from a gender inclusion perspective into the economy. And I don't even know how many zeros it is, but it's a few $1 trillion will be released into the global economy just through gender inclusion. But what do? We have structures that say in order to get a loan, you need collateral in an environment where people don't have access. We have all sorts of frameworks in place while it is to protect, and I fully understand the need for protection of financial institutions. I also believe we need to put our money where our mouth is in terms of developing specifically female SMEs. So in saying all of this, right, so we have this inclusion agenda, we have all of this legislation, but we're still not making any progress from a psychological perspective, right? And that's fundamentally because we understand the business case and we act on it, but we're not actually shifting the hearts of our people in relation to how do I make that relatable? Because it will always be someone else's problem. It will always be a woman's challenge. It will always be an African person's challenge. And this study that was done by Harvard actually says, in instances of resistance, there are 3 psychological threats that people feel in relation to this. One is they want to defend the status quo. A perfect example, and I have shared my age so you guys know how old I am. So 27 years ago, I was in mining, and we were part of the first group of women that went underground. And if you know mining, you'll know they're very non-negotiable on their health and safety stats. And like within the first month, the slips and falls went through the roof from a reporting perspective. The immediate response was, that is why we don't allow women to go underground. But the reality is we were wearing men's PPE. They were not fit for purpose. So the shoes were too clunky, the pants wasn't fitting right, which is why we were actually falling and tripping. So in defending, it's important to stick to the facts and understand your root cause analysis to be able to say, is this truly the problem? So when you defend, on what basis are you defending? The second one is denying. You know, we don't have that problem here. It's someone else's issue, right? And for me, at the end of the day, it goes back to that statement I said earlier around the importance of us meeting people where they are, not necessarily where we are. But that does require you to be a bit uncomfortable. It does require you to be vulnerable. And once again, we've been taught not to be those things. And the last one is around distancing. No, I don't seek people in color. It's we're all human beings here. All lives matter. And it's not taking away from any of that. But fundamentally, at the root of all conflict is the fact that one party believes that their rights are more important than the next. And I think in terms of having constructive conversations, it doesn't have to be conflictual. And I'll give you an example. Last month was LGBTQ month, Awareness Month. And I put up a post to say, I'm an ally and be careful who you hate. It could be someone you love. It's something I passionately believe in. And I say that with a specific religious framework and all of that. You cannot believe the hate mail I received, in that people said that they were representing a majority, and who am I to be putting forward this narrative? And rather than fight back and defend, I actually got on a call with these individuals. And there was no screaming, there was no shouting. This was to try to understand, what is it in what I've said has made you that uncomfortable? And when you can have that conversation that says, help me understand better. I'm a firm believer that 9 times out of 10, in relation to things like this, it is not driven out of hatred. It's because of the stuff we've consumed and the frameworks that we believe to be true, which is why I believe we need to do work to understand those frameworks as individuals. So 25 years ago, we all spoke about IQ. IQ then transitioned to EQ, and EQ was all about being emotionally mature. Currently, we talk about CQ. And CQ is our cultural intelligence, right? In that your ability to be agile in this form of intelligence allows you to be relatable, but also allows you to learn from a fundamentally different frame of reference. So there are 4 key components of CQ, and that is your motivation to be able to do things. So am I motivated and confident enough to go in and say, guys, you know what, I really don't understand. Can you help me understand? The knowledge that comes with it, because I do believe you're a sum of what you consume. And I think with everything that's so prolific in social media, you need to consider what it is you expose yourself to. It's around strategy and it's around action. And often when I have this conversation with people, they say, but you're asking me to forget who I am and everything I was raised to believe. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying be politically correct either. What I am saying is take the time out to understand whether some of the stuff that we operate within, whether it's actually relevant for the world that we live in today. So the work that I think we need to do is around our ability to adapt. And that's around, in all of this frame of reference of 48 years, what is my core and what is my flex? So my core is my non-negotiables. My flex are those things that I choose to change. So my team who are on the call know I'm very much, I fight very hard from a gender perspective. When I worked in a junior mining company a few years ago, we had to do stakeholder engagement, which meant going into rural villages to talk with tribal councils about what we were trying to achieve. And in the first meeting that we attended, so I wore my PPE and everything, they wouldn't allow us in because as women, we needed to dress in a certain way. Now, I could have easily said, no, this is the patriarchy, I'm not going to change. But there was a bigger thing at hand, right? By me putting on a skirt and covering my hair, it actually didn't change the core of who I was. But what it actually allowed was for me to have a conversation with someone whose frame of reference was fundamentally different from mine, but we were still able to make progress. If I'd been hard and said, no, I'm not changing who I am, I'm fighting for the cause, I really wouldn't have made the progress and traction we actually needed to get the stuff done. So when I say it starts with you, I think take the time out to understand What does intelligence look like to you? What does success look like to you? What does teamwork look like to you? And in interrogating each of those, you will actually be able to understand better your core and your flex. So one of my things is timekeeping, right? Like nothing drives me crazy than people who are late for meetings. So my team is probably laughing in the background because I was raised to believe that at the end of the day, if you are late for a meeting, it means you are disrespecting the person who is in the session with you. But when you delve in deeper, everyone's cultural framework around time management is fundamentally different, right? So should it be something that is so hard and fast that it actually causes my blood pressure to rise? No, it actually shouldn't, right? But that core and flex work that's needed requires a lot of self-insight, requires you being comfortable with the discomfort of things we were raised to believe. The things we were raised to believe about one another, whether we could live in harmony, whether as a woman you could do certain things, whether as an Indian female you could do certain things, whether your hair needed to be straight or your hair needed to be curly, whether you could wear sneakers and still be successful. And while it seems like I'm oversimplifying it, if you put all those layers together, you'll understand how complex it actually is, because those are the things that feed our biases in relation to both conscious and unconscious biases. And please, everyone on the call, I'm not standing here saying I'm free of all bias and all of that. It's not it. Every day is a new learning experience. And every day is, sometimes we mess up, but we pick ourselves up and we move forward, right? What are you doing around addressing it in the work environment, in your social circles, around the way we refer to one another, right? Around the examples that we may use that may not be relatable to people, around the socials that we have that may be exclusionary in nature, around the job profiles or job ads that we put out that are actually exclusionary. And in saying all of that, once again, you could have the best policy in the world. You could have all of these fantastic structures in place. But fundamentally, if we don't start shifting or making the change in ourselves as individuals, progress is never going to get to where it needs to be. And it's not to say that revolutions happen overnight, right? But if we can even just have one person whose frame of reference changes to, I know it all, I am the best, there's only one person in this race and that's me, to something around how do we together solve for social cohesion in our country? That is how we're going to fundamentally get change take place. So, and I am coming to my conclusion. I think the one thing that I've learned most important over my 27, 28 years that I've been working is one, the importance of authenticity. 30 years ago, organizations had very strict dress codes. And if you think it's bad now, those days it was even to the detail of women having to wear high heels and pantyhose. But authenticity is beyond the way we look. Authenticity is around how free we feel to be ourselves in the language we use and the stories that we tell. And no matter who you are in an organization, in a social circle, your story is equally as important as the next person's. And I think if we can start embracing that more, we will get to a point where we are more feeling towards one another, where we are more accepting towards one another. I can't think of anything other than being authentic, because to try to, and I learned something interesting. And I don't know if you on the call have heard it. I was talking to someone who taught me about code switching. And for those who may not know, like I didn't know, code switching means that depending on your environment and your audience, you fundamentally change your approach. And I was gutted when I heard about this, because I thought, how tiring must it be for me to have to change my accent, for me to have to consider what I'm wearing in a different way on a daily basis, right? And we're the ones that are perpetuating it, right? Because if we create the freedom for people to talk with an accent, to dress the way they require or feel comfortable, Those are the things that we need to be having conversations on, because we all talk about authenticity, we talk about psychological safety, but none of us want to be the ones who actually drive that change. I think the second one for me, speak your truth, even if your voice shakes. And that, I think, has been one of my hardest lessons, because the social and structural exclusionary frameworks that exist within some corporates make it difficult, right? And we can have a whole long conversation on imposter syndrome, but that's one of the contributing factors around imposter syndrome. I don't really fit, maybe I shouldn't be here, but I don't look the way they do, I don't talk the way they do. Your voice matters, and your voice matters insofar as I know that when I walk in a room, I represent every woman before me that has not had the opportunities I've had. And it's a responsibility that I take very seriously, because I know I don't operate in isolation. I work in respect of a representation of a group of people. The third one, you're free to make your choices, but you're not free of the consequences of your choices. And I think that to me is anything in this world can be justified. War is justified on a daily basis. Prejudice is justified. And at the end of the day, understand you can have that, make your choice, but you're not free from the consequences of those decisions that you make. And a perfect example around this, and this is speaking truth and choices, is when we watch things and when we read things, we see it off our frame of reference. And understand that when we read the same thing, we don't get the same story out of it. And give people a safe enough space to be able to share that. The fourth one for me is around failing forward. So those who like Enneagrams and like labeling people, I am a 1, which drives me crazy when people say I'm a strict perfectionist. So the whole principle of failing forward, you can understand, is deeply, deeply uncomfortable for me. But it's something that I'm still working towards, and that is around how do we fail forward, right? Because the way in which I was raised around what does good look like, what does success look like, we don't fail, we don't. And being in all of this experience to now think, oh my God, I may not know the answer to that, or, I failed in doing this. It's actually a learning, right? Rather than the end of the world. And that's been a very, very hard lesson for me to learn, because you have to give yourself the grace to mess up sometimes. And I find that there's more beauty in the grace that says, I'm really sorry I messed up, I didn't know the answers, versus, I'll try harder next time, that'll be the last time that'll happen. You're just setting yourself up for failure. So actually give yourself grace. And as I'm saying it, I'm like trying to internalize it myself, because that's one of the hardest things for me. I think the first one, which is something I am comfortable with, which I shouldn't be, is nothing grows from comfort zones. And I push my team really hard, and I push people around me really hard around constantly being curious and wanting to know the answers and understanding how this would impact on that. And I also have had to learn that sometimes people are comfortable in those comfort zones and they don't want to grow, and that is okay. But from a personal perspective, for me, nothing grows from comfort zones. The minute I'm uncomfortable and you get that feeling in your stomach and then your hands get sweaty, either something absolutely fantastic is going to happen or we're going to fail forward. And I'm learning how to embrace that. I think number 6, make the ceiling the floor. If we don't, we're always going to be arguing about targets. We're always going to be talking about it's their problem. We're always going to say this is unreasonable. Making the ceiling the floor fundamentally shifts the narrative around what is acceptable, fundamentally shifts the narrative that says you can't because you're a woman, fundamentally shifts the narrative that says, yeah, but they are all that way. And as much as it's easy to say, it's very, very difficult to challenge, because it is at the core of the culture of organizations, where a lot of times these things are seen to be ticking a box. We're not here to tick boxes. We are fundamentally here to shift and change narratives to create work environments that one day all of our children can thrive in. The seventh one is personal to me, in that titles are meaningless. I do believe that how you treat people is your legacy, because there's that saying, and I think it is Maya Angelou that said it, in that people may forget what you say, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And just as much as I say, extend grace to yourself, take the time out to get to know your team members, to get to know your peers, because those are the instances where you learn the greatest lessons. Number 8, and you would have heard me say it quite a few times this morning, leave behind something better than what we've inherited. And this is highly personal for me, being a mother. I don't want to leave a work environment that says to my daughter, you can't be successful in this career because you're a girl, or you will not be considered for this because your hair is too untidy. You know, while I make it sound very simple, those are the things that matter, because in some people's view, the way in which you look is a determinant of your success. And how do we shift those narratives to try to create an environment that says, I actually like those sneakers, or your hair is really cool, or, you know, I didn't know you had a nose ring. The reality is the younger generation have moved way, way beyond the parameters that we were raised with, right? It's more around the self-acceptance that comes with being comfortable with who you are. And if you're authentic, you won't have a problem in that area. And I think 9, meet people where they are, not where you are. And this has been hard insofar as we feel that we need to have the answers. We don't listen to understand, we listen to respond. And in everything that I've done, I've had to learn to quieten myself more. And sometimes it means me having to go back to minutes of a meeting or to ask a person, please repeat yourself. There's actually no harm in that. And take the time to actually understand, take the time to be able to comfortably say, I don't know. And because I usually say I don't know, and then I go and Google the hell out of it to try to figure out what it is. But that curiosity, I think for me, the curiosity and the changeability has been something that has helped me through my career. And at the age that I'm in, it's all about the youngsters. And not that I'm that old, but I have a personal agenda in relation to the younger generation coming into the workplaces, on the understanding that the responsibilities we have as organizations and leaders in organizations to fundamentally shift all of these things. So what's the worst that will happen? Once again, you know, we need to start getting comfortable with that discomfort that says, my ears are getting red, my hands are getting sweaty, I've got this feeling in the pit of my stomach. Get comfortable with that feeling, because nothing grows out of comfort zones, as I said earlier. And that concludes my talk this morning. Thank you so much for your time. You know, when I said to Venetia up front, and Venetia and I know each other for over 15 years, if not longer. When I said to her, I am a young girl from Actonville, the only line that was young, because I'm not really young. But the reason I share that story is, those of you who know Actonville will know that it's an Indian location on the East Rand. My parents never had more than primary school education. And we never had dinner around a table where we spoke about exchange rates, business. That's not the way I was raised. But I'm also a firm believer that we need to be the role models for those youngsters from a representation perspective, because if you look like someone, the relatability actually drives certain behaviors. So that's why I do proudly state where I'm from. I apologize, Venetia, for calling myself young, but I'm going to hand over to you now.
No, thank you so much, Malisha. I think thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom on this topic of unconscious bias and structural exclusion. And I think what you shared with us this morning is that unconscious bias is like that hidden script that plays in the background of our minds. and it's constantly shaping those perceptions and influencing our decisions throughout us not even realizing that, So I think, thank you so much. It was just so important. And I think what stood out for me and the reactions from the participants was when you spoke about just speaking your truth, even if your voice is shaking. And I think that the whole emotions that we received and the reactions that we received, some part just to do that. But thank you so much for sharing those golden nuggets. And I think that the one thing that we can take away from this is that each of us has the power to challenge our own bias and create a more inclusive and equitable world. So yes, Malisha, thank you so much for your talk and your time this morning. What I will do now is I will open up the floor for any questions that there is. I can see there is some comments on the chat. Failing forward, this is from an unknown user. Failing forward approach, I can think that organizations can turn setbacks into stepping stones or achieving more effective and sustainable diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Thank you so much. I think we definitely have some more engagements in the chat. But what I will do is that if anyone wants to ask Malisha any question, your time is now, unless you want to put it onto the chat.
So B, I think there was a question, if I can. It says, so what human traits can be attributed to culture and which ones to individual character? And therefore, should a bias or metric for measure avoid of being useful, like a flimsy handshake or non-eye contact whilst greeting or at any time? So it's a fine line, right? So human traits is around your physical abilities, whereas cultural traits is, I was taught to be very respectful of hierarchy, right? So I, over the years, had to be able to realize that in finding my voice, I could still challenge the status quo. It didn't mean I was disrespectful. But that's the inside work, unknown user, that I think we need to focus on. That whole thing around a person not giving eye contact can't be trusted. It's a social construct that we were raised with, right? Because is it true? Is it valid? And in what sort of environment? So that is why I think the learning and education for ourselves is so important. Not just to read about people and stereotype, but to be able to read about people and understand better. And it goes back to meeting people where you're from versus where they're from. For some people, code switching is natural and unintentional. It's true. And this is a personal view, unknown user. And I didn't say it's a bad thing. I think the importance for me is if you're comfortable being able to flex, that's cool. But if you feel a need to fundamentally shift who you are to present yourself in certain situations, that is where I was coming from a code switching perspective. I don't know if there's anything else, V. You're on mute. Nisha, you're on mute.
Okay.
And again.
Can everyone hear me now?
Yes, take 5.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for your comments and appreciation. It is much appreciated. So I think just as a reminder, please note that the recording of this session will be shared and it can be accessed on the Business Engage YouTube channel. And what we would like is basically just to thank all and recognize all our partners and sponsors, Accenture, Business Engage, Nedbank, AECI, Anglo Gold Ashanti, EOH, Kearney, Live Health Care, SAP, and Refinitiv, BMW, and Vodacom. Thank you so much for the sponsors for sponsoring the Voices of Change, and a special acknowledgement and thanks to all involved in organizing this morning's coffee session. It is a great opportunity to network and engage and get the session done. There's a lot of work that gets done in the background. To all those, we hear you, we see you, and you are appreciated. And to the agents of change, these are the founding members of Voices of Change. As change agents of change, let our voices resonate with the power to dismantle the walls of unconscious bias. The journey towards a bias-free society begins with us, our voices of change. And lastly, to our attendees and participants, thank you so much for the meaningful engagement. We really do appreciate it. And with that being said, this is it from EOH. We really enjoyed having this coffee session and being the host, and looking forward to the rest of the initiatives from our Voices of Change platforms that we have. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, that's a wrap for us.
Thanks,
All
Vi.
good.
Thanks,
all good.
everyone. Have a good weekend.
Right. Have a fabulous Friday, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.